Luckily, I did have Inquisitor Rameus to write down an adamantium-clad document called the Lorica Lancefire Gift, which completely detailed what exactly Forge Grier donated for my personal use, and then asked Primarch Khan to countersign it, making it perfectly legal. 1,000,000 Thalax Lorica armors bestowed to my name in perpetuity. Maybe they expected I would die soon? I was good for 1,000,000 years at least. Copies of the document would be sent to the Inquisition Conclave, the High Lords of Terror and the Mechonicus Parliament on Mars, for the purpose of covering my precious ass, once they realized what has happened. So, I rolled my precious scroll beside my warrant of trade inside the null box, and began practicing the order reductor control and command engrams and machine litanies, which was sometimes exasperating. The pilots were human, and had a package of Astartes-like indoctrination codes implanted into their minds, so they could be simply told what to do, just like normal Astartes. But no, the Mechonicus had to obscure everything under a metric tons of logic canticles, machine prayers and innumerable battle doctrines and ironclad rules. On the other hand, my tech marines did have an easy time learning how to become subcommanders for the machine army, finding them far easier to control than a bunch of sub-sapient guardian turrets. Even better, a part of the Thalax received posts on top of tanks and transports as sentries and pintle-mounted gun crew. Normal Astartes chapters used their own battle brothers for this role, which I found wasteful. Astartes were too few already to use them as vehicle crew. Each of my Titans received a cohort of 100 Thalax as support, since the Scutari were good, but far too fragile on a battlefield where Titan's weapons could vaporize them even on a miss. My capital ships also received a security cohort of 100 Thalax, while the Blackstone fortresses held 10,000 each, for no reason at all. Barely 60,000 Thalax were allocated for these purposes, while the rest would boost the front lines or provide perimeter guards, and any other role I saw fit, even as drop pod troopers or paradrop via grav chutes. Forge Grier was rapidly churning out more vehicles and power armor, while wounded soldiers received bionic limbs and even upgrades to their equipment and armor. They were obviously trying to test the new STCs, and found the death core of Krieg the perfect test bed, as they were happy to die anyways. It was amazing what a Forge world could do if properly motivated and supplied with metal and organic materials, even though I noticed several Vulcanite guns were stolen from my troops by invisible mechanical agents, as the Imperium had lost the Vulkite technology in the chaos of the Horus Heresy, or other unfortunate invasions. So, on the day my crusade was scheduled to depart, I moved once more on the Forge world, with the original STC for the Vulkite disintegrator, freshly copied from the Nostari Fane. I don't like when you steal from me, Fabricator. Plus, if Vulkite technology was easy to replicate, you would have done so long ago, from the relics still locked inside your vaults. Here, the original ancient template for a handheld Vulkite gun. But, I demanded in a harsh tone. Yes? The Fabricator asked with obvious unease. I will need 20 Victory-class battleships, 80 Astartes battle barges and 600 Nova cruisers. You saw what ships I use, just make them similar, I demanded with my rogue trader charisma. The two Fabricators gulped audibly, as this was not a small order. It was something on the order a segmentum fleet, able to devastate entire galactic sectors with ease. It is possible, but it will take a long time, Lord Lancefire. And a handheld weapon isn't that powerful, no matter how ancient. The Fabricator locum spoke first, and trying to negotiate up. I realize that. When the order is finalized, you will receive a larger gun, able to be mounted on tanks and knights. This is only the preview, I said with a shrug, and vanished. A second later, Canis vanished as well, as he was feeling awkward being left behind. Woo? The wolf asked me, as I sat in my command throne. Yes, I know. I forgot. I explained with a bit of guilt. All ships. Switch to autistic sensors. That means passive only, the new guys. I ordered on the wide fleet comm, then began to move away from Grier and towards the Orphean _war. First target was the homeworld of the Angels_Revenant on Libethra, who had gone dark recently. Warp engine destroyers from the Indomitus fleet were already en route to obtain news, but I already knew the Astartes world had been attacked. Of course, it may be another enemy and not the Necrons, but the chances were small. Necrons were spreading out on a wide front, and engaging everyone, from Chaos warbands to Orc worlds and even a Tyrannid splinter fleet, which has vanished a year ago. The Imperium was next, but luckily for them I was prepared to help. By the next week, we found the Angels Revenant battling their Necron invaders in the ruins of their fortress monastery, while Necron ships fired towards the ground, cracking a continent in half. Immediately, I set up a dozen Nova mines in the midst of the Necron escort ships, pulverizing dozens and forcing the larger Scythe and Tomb ships to disengage. Main outcomes appeared on the Vox channel screen, bypassing the autistic locks, but failing to produce any sound, as the Vox casters were physically disconnected from the network, following the scrap code experience at Agrippina a century ago. Out of curiosity, I fired the Immaterium beam at the largest Necron ship, but the signal still came. Oh well, they didn't have any souls to erase, the poor Necrons. It would come to a straight fight. Carriers, begin deployment. I ordered via the sounding board, and moved my fortress in the lead, flanked by the Eternal Lament. A green energy beam splashed over the void shields, and even pierced a few until I flared the iron shield to block the incoming ray. As if by magic, the green beam got interrupted and vanished. Iron shields to max. I ordered next, and soon the entire Crusade fleet was protected against Gauss weaponry. But, as our torpedo corvettes launched their first salvo of iron-head torpedoes, a green wave flared out from the lead Tomb ships and exploded all our torpedoes. Damn it. The Necrons had something like a Nova blast of their own, which would make our fighter run suicidal at best. A minute later, we reached lance range and began firing, while the Nova cruisers fired their cannons at the weaker Scythe harvest ships, blowing up one and crippling another. As the fleets moved in parallel, the wounded ship got left behind, and soon got boarded by Primarch Khan and his Primaris Space Marines. I sighed inward, and added 1,000 Thalax and several Tech Marines to support him, while also flicking the larger Necron constructs into Libethra's sun. Knight-sized Necron constructs were immune to infantry-scale weapons and would butcher the poor white scars otherwise. Obviously, I deployed my main ground force to support the besieged Angel Revenants on the planet, and kept firing at the Necron fleet with my own. After an hour of constant void combat, the Necrons had enough and turned around to flee, leaving behind 100 escorts and 5 Scythe ships, for 100 corvettes and 3 cruisers that got a bit close. Their 2 Necron Tomb ships were not even damaged, which didn't bode well for this crusade. We could destroy the weaker ships, but the biggest ones were nigh invulnerable to lance batteries. Torpedoes might have worked, but they were intercepted well before we could reach the enemy. Still a victory, but not a good one. Damn Necrons. After the minor debacle was over, the Necrons on Libethra were finally put to death, for the final time. Even on the ground, the Necrons fought with determined hate, trying to exterminate anything alive. They were also easy to trick and made to chase roving orcs and random Tyrannids, while our troops gunned them down in massed volleys. Spartan had come up with this ancient strategy, but it did work on Necrons as they were not allowed to regenerate, even as Necron infantry marched in ranks after ranks into our guns. It was the other Necron constructs that were more of a threat, from tiny scarabs to flying Canoptech acanthrites. Beam's weapons were highly effective against both, as a single iron beam could incinerate 100 scarabs with one shot, and sometimes many more if they were bunched up. The Cobra anti-air tanks and the new Astarias proved their worth against flying constructs, although the Cobras were certainly in need of better firepower. Necron constructs were durable as hell, being made from necrodermis and slowly regenerating non-fatal damage. As a stopgap measure, I began replacing one of the Cobra's multi-lasers with last beam cannons, as to give them a killing shot against tougher Necron enemies. The Ragnarok tanks that already received iron cannons had about same damage output and blast radius like a plasma cannon, but suffered none of the overheating and explosion risk of the plasma weapons. The transport models were in dire need of shields and better weapons too, since the tarantula turret bolted on top could not hope to eliminate an entire Necron squad before they blew up my poor transport. For now, the infantry carriers would have to wait and deploy in the rear. The infantry should not rush ahead into battle anyways, instead dig in or hole inside bunkers and fortifications, which allow them a better chance of survival. The Necron Gauss weapons were extremely deadly for any human, even if one had carapace armor and a helmet. I was not going to redress millions of years' worth of technological advancement with a better las rifle or even adamantium chest plates. The armed sentinels performed great, as I expected. Either Blackstone or Tiamat bone armor were enough to block the Necron infantry guns, and that was the best I could hope until I managed to give them shields. The new exoframes did okay. Their main purpose was to carry heavy weapons and support the tanks and other troops, and in that role it worked. Taking return fire, not so much. For now, the shield mounting priority had been heavy tanks and my Primaris Marines in their Invictus warsuits, as they went in the thick of the fight to eliminate the most difficult targets like Necron Lords and Cryptex. Volkite weapons were proven useless versus Necrons, and swiftly replaced with las cannons or iron beamers as soon as my sons yelled in my mind. Then again, I should have probably known. Maybe the Volkite weapons were a bit overhyped, especially after seeing Forge Grier being so eager for them. And lastly, my heavy tanks and knights performed excellently. Not that I was worried. Iron flare shields blocked most Necron weaponry by default, and the weave shields needed to be dialed on certain frequencies to be as effective. Didn't know that before, but war is the best teacher after all. Luckily, I did have thousands of tech marines ready and able to play with their new toys, and find out how to best use them. By the next fight, we should have near-perfect coverage for the important units, and begin shielding the next ones. One doesn't go to war with the perfect army. He returns with one, if he wins. Which means I had much to repair and learn. Woo! Canis woke me from my revelry, as I did have a whole crusade staff waiting for my decision. Do we go for Drusilla Majoris, a hive world of 6 billion people? Or do we reinforce Amara, the sector capital? We can't allow either to fall, yet our forces are only enough to defend one of them. Dreadnought Chiron asked as I raised my eyes onto the large hololith map showing the Orpheus sector. The Necrons are not fighting strategically. They go after the easiest victims. Cutting away reinforcing points. I think they will attack Amara last. I decided after exchanging a glance with my wolf. Strange, right? Should a wolf be able to discern enemy strategy from a long look at the map? Or was I just imagining things, and Canis simply reinforced my own ideas? Primat Khan turned towards me, holding his chin in deep thought. The risk is too great, Lancefire. I also think you are right, but the Necrons are acting erratically. What if they throw bones and attack wherever they fall? I personally thought the Necrons had far better planning, but I also wasn't sure. They could also be chasing golden cows with starry eyes. Okay then. The Indomitus fleet can separate and protect Amara. My own forces will depart for Drusilla. I allowed with a nod towards the Primarch. The Primarch frowned for a second, then nodded. He had been sent by the Emperor exactly for this task, and given numerous ships and troops. My presence here was a boon, but not required. There will be another Imperial force arriving soon, Adepta Tertia and her sisters. Between the three of us, I predict a decisive victory. I rose an eyebrow, but stayed silent. Silence was golden, I was often taught by my Inquisitor wife. There was also a risk, should Janice try to steal away my silent sisters. Although their powers were less urgent against Necrons, the Crusade will surely need them again. A few days later, we had just arrived in the Drusilla Majoris system, when the Necron fleet also arrived, now reinforced with a third tomb ship, as well as nearly 1,000 escort vessels. Fine. Make me cheat again, and use the Tesseract for offense. The Necrons will surely realize what I had, and perhaps find a way to counter it next time. That was the risk I wasn't normally willing to take, but then again, what could I do? Retreat? Fight against impossible odds and lose 90% of my forces? Sorry, not my style. Pef Lancefire was here to blow up Necrons and chew bubblegum. And they didn't have bubblegum in 40k. Plus, the Imperials were not here to observe me cheat, so I had an excuse. Can't blame a man for winning too easily, right? M growled at me in the same tone as Canis, just as I rose a finger to begin the attack. You have the most bullshit luck in the universe, my lord. I just sighed and clicked on the Tesseract crystal. They should invent bubblegum if they wanted a chance. Opening my eyes with the Tesseract vision, I began to deploy 1,000 Nova mines around the Necron escort ships, as to remove the annoying bugs from my tactical sense. Not even waiting for the explosions, I began to deploy my Tyrannid Auxilia inside a large tomb ship, although only the ones not implanted with mind shackle scarabs. The Necrons would surely detect or maybe override my controls, giving them a powerful army instead. No, feral Tyrannids were useful enough, as they would force the Necron lords to awaken and deploy their best troops to protect the most fragile or important ship sections. Brrrwum. Ba-ang. Shockwaves from the Nova mines splashed against the outer shields, making the Black Lament shiver for a second. What is this anomaly? Nemesa Tlazolt, rectify the erroneous existence of these aberrant life forms infesting my ship. A powerful Necron lord demanded from his command seat. As you direct, Lord Ixototik. Awakening warriors and destroyers. The Necron Nemesis spoke with a great voice, and began tapping his control engrams, filling the tomb ship with defensive troops and directing them to protect vital areas. Excellent. The higher Necron ranks even spoke Gothic, making my task a little easier. I did have a modicum of Necron vocabulary installed on my mind implant, mostly such that my pet Catan could explain what some devices were, but Gothic was way better. Sending a bunch of orcs on the other two ships, to keep them busy and observe their reactions. Only later did I learn the Necrons use a type of omnilingua that transcends normal language barriers. It sounded as perfect Gothic to my ears. Arch-Cryptek Tohoke. I detect the old ones spawn on my ship. Foul orcs, despoiling the pristine halls of my ship. Another Necron lord yelled from his command seat. Allow me to deploy my tomb_sentinel constructs, Lord Mutlan_Cutlock. In the confined walkways of your ship, the exile_cannon on my sentinels will be extremely effective. The ancient Cryptek proposed in a servile voice. And use your smoking mirror. Why was this orc incursion not foreseen by your prediction engine? The Necron Lord shouted while holding a control rod in his hand. Wait a minute. A prediction engine, and a mind-controlled Cryptek? Curious. Boom. The third tomb ship exploded without my direct input. Why, those orc meat boys surely didn't have anything to do with it, I hope. Oh well, 1,000,000 orcs for a tomb ship, surely a decent trade, right Gork? This Tohoke Cryptek took out a fairly innocent tablet screen and began scrolling up and down, then left and right, almost like some scrolling through a movie to reach the interesting part. The probing attacks on Forge Mera and Amraphel are going as planned, while we gather forces for the final push towards Amara and Hydrogast. This human hive world was not supposed to be defended, my lord. And yet it is. We even lost a tomb ship already. Do you hear me? Where did you go? The Necron Lord exclaimed in outrage as his precious Cryptek vanished in front of his robotic eyes. His artifacts vanished as well, and a second later the Necron Lord found himself inside the system's sun, melting slowly. Click click. The tomb ship came empty, as I recovered my orcs before they blew up another priceless tomb ship, and the tomb sentinels found themselves frozen in my labyrinth beside the genial Cryptek. A minute later, the other tomb ship is similarly cleaned, and then stored in the Tesseract. I have almost recovered the wealth of Necron artifacts I had, before the Emperor fleeced me naked. Perhaps I shouldn't flaunt my wealth before a greedy god. Now, a few hours to repair this poor hive world called Drusilla Majoris, then I can play with my new robot toy. Genestealers, cultists, criminals and corrupted nobles, you were supposed to die anyways when the Necrons hit this world, but the rest of the people should be happy for their escape. And then recruit 1,000 guard regiments at my orders. I placed Ottilie Lancefire, an experienced daughter of mine, as the new governor and detached a whole blank Astartes chapter, the Black Sharks, as the guardians of this system. Unless the Necrons returned with another fleet, they should do fine. Already knowing a bunch of the Necron plans for their attack, the Crusade fleet departed for Hive-world Chimerium to deploy another chapter there, but luck can also be bad. We found the Hive world in full riot, with millions of dead filling the streets, while Chaos ships prowled the outer edges of the system, sending infiltrators and saboteurs on the planet to raise hell, while also blockading any escaping ships. Click click. My Astartes and Blank division could use some live training on the ground, while the Thalax could deploy on the Chaos ships and raise hell back. They barely had 2,000 Chaos Marines, while I sent 20,000 Thalax and 200 Tech Marines to secure my prizes. A few minutes later, I also sent 200 Silent Sisters to protect my Thalax cyborgs from incoming warp spells. Why did these nobodies get to have 1,000 Chaos Sorcerers? A few hours later, I walked beside Chiron on the bridge of the Chaos Battle Barge, kicking aside blown-up corpses. They do not show signs of corruption. No warp deformities, no extra limbs. I noticed with a curious voice. We barely lost 400 cyborgs and the suits could always be repaired. Not all warp corruption is visible, Chapter Master. But all their Chaos Marines were Psychers, so I would guess these are the Tenebrae Warband. You know how it works, if their Chapter Master falls to Chaos, they soon follow. And then, they only recruited Psychers. The old Deathwatch Dreadnought explained wisely. Canis walked beside me and chewed up bits of brains splattered around. Ah. He added with a certain voice. What? Mind-controlled? Canis had the strangest ideas. Still, he was rarely wrong. Click. I brought my Inquisitor wife on board, and swiftly described the problem. It is surely possible. Brother Ulrich, taste what kind of mind control they used, and who did it. The Inquisitor commanded to her bodyguard Deathwatch. The old veteran removed his helmet and began tasting bits of brains, chewing them slowly. Lord Lancefire is correct. They were under mind control, some winged Xenos creature called a root mind. I believe they may be the Karave. Brother Semnai also began to taste some brains then spat out the remains. I read about the massacre of Cormac. The entire population was infected by the Karave's corruption and had to be slaughtered. Let's hope it is not the same with Chimerium. I offered in a level voice and kept walking, until we reached the bridge and dozens of Tech Marines using the Texorcist skills on the remaining cogitators. Inquisitor Romaeus nodded slowly. From my previous knowledge on the Karave, only the biological are affected. We may not need to burn this world. But these are not the Karave themselves. And there might be chaos involved as well. It usually is, with the warp. Brother Ulrich spoke with a stern tone, and covered himself once more with his old pattern helmet. We will know soon enough. It is why my sons trained to become Texorcists after all. I offered in a mild voice. The Deathwatch did have plenty of experience in dealing with the Xenos or other warp entities, but they were not foolproof. Nobody was, in this damned galaxy. Even the advanced Necrons fell prey to the Flayer curse. On the other hand, I did just obtain a nearly intact fleet, 1 battle barge, 5 strike cruisers, and 11 frigates. Just enough to create another Astartes chapter without reducing my Crusade fleet. I may need to visit Forge Mirror and refit, and see what the Necrons were up to with their probing attacks. I doubted it was only a few ships skirting the outer system. After that, Amraphel. That was a Republican world, ruled by a parliament. I was curious how they managed that in 40k. I have confirmed it, sire. Primarch Corax has indeed joined the Deathwatch at Fort Prescience, as a black shield, alongside 3,000 of his Gene sons, all of them blanks. A black-robed Custodes spoke with a certain voice, ignoring the two Primarchs standing at the side the Emperor. And this was soon after Lancefire saved Deliverance from a giant orc invasion. The brown-robed man sitting at his ancient wooden desk asked gently, as if only confirming his thoughts. Exactly, sire. Though in that battle none of his Lamenters were present. Only some auxiliary units, the Lancefire Knights, and the Deus Ex Machina Legion. A month later, new Lamenter's successors, using the Corax gene seed, began to appear, spreading out radially to every forge world in vicinity. The Custodes confirmed with a grave voice, then stepped away and vanished in a dark tunnel. Sire. If Corax is alive, why? The lion asked with an eager voice, before getting interrupted by a golden glove raising in the air. Alive is not the right word. There are states of existence in between life or death, as both of you know well. But unlike your particular case, frozen in a stasis field, my brave crow had gone too deep into the warp. I think Russ has suffered the same fate. The Empress spoke in a mild voice, but only Guilliman seemed to understand. He was always the brooding one. And the harvested gene seed of the Raven Guard is still not viable. Only the ancient gene storage on Mars remains, until there is no more. Robot Guilliman said in a hard tone, eyes glinting in the dim lights. An Aquila pendant still hanged from his neck, almost like a noose waiting to strangle him. So, Corax is atoning for his sins in the Deathwatch. I wonder if Lancefire imposed that penance on him, just like he did for Khan. The lion wondered in a sarcastic voice. The Emperor smiled, maybe a bit sad. I believe it was exactly so. I may need to give Lancefire an official title, like Tempor Mortis. The one who comes for your deaths, if you fail in your purpose. The lion shuddered, perhaps not really comfortable with the thought. He tried to argue a counter, then gave up when Guilliman threw him a glare. And Sanguinius? He has not returned, even now. The lion asked, changing the dangerous subject. He has gone after the second fortress. I thought you liked my first one, even if it is covered in gold plating now. The Emperor asked, maybe a bit ironically. I would have liked it more, if you didn't make it the Sororitas Mobile Sanctus. You just gave the priesthood more power. As if they didn't already have half of the Imperium under their thumb. Even your loyal lackey objected. The lion growled with a nod towards Guilliman. Robot can get the third, if and when we get it. They are rather well protected, just like the one at Precipice has been. The second one will not be easy either, as the Necron Thoct _dynasty is blocking the way for the Blood Angels. Orcs as well, recently. The Emperor explained with a tiny shrug, already knowing Sanguinius would be in for a hard fight. But he had Patrocles and the Tesseract to save him from dire danger. It should still work. The lion grunted, finding his importance ranking had sunk even more. What about mine? He demanded with an eager voice. The Emperor smiled, and turned to measure the older-looking lion. His stasis pod had not been maintained properly, and it showed. The third fortress is somewhere west of Fort_Excalibris. But, you would need to go through the food infestations in Quipax Reach, past more Necrons and maybe Eldar too. The Astronomicon doesn't reach that far. Your Dark Angels might not be able to get there, but the Ultramarines can. Which is why I will give Robot his chance. This would only put us at parity with Lancefire. Our mighty galactic Imperium, matched by a single man. Barely an Astartes, or not even one. The lion growled again, visibly distressed. A single man? Lancefire is more than he seems. Which is why he has free hands and a modicum of my trust. I am quite curious what trouble he will get into next. The Emperor said with an easy voice. As annoying as the strange blank was, he was always a wonder of amazement and amusement. Especially when the Eldar were involved. And his children as well, at least a few of them. Blank librarians. The very thought of it almost made him lock himself in a Jenner lab and try another 1,000 times to decode the impossible make of his gene code. For now, the Imperium needed his crafty hand to guide it, until this faith problem got solved, one way or another. Very likely another way, as the infant soul inside the Astronomicon was growing at a fast pace, integrating the warp domains of Khorne and a few genetic hints from the Nurgle shards. They will likely call it the Rapture, and maybe the Rupture. Either way, the galaxy would be torn in two, despite the Eye of Terror being punched to death by an impossible man who couldn't exist. Or maybe because of him. Hopefully, Canis will grow fast enough by that time, and recover Russ from the warp. It was a gamble, but it did seem to work if the reports of the death of Vashta were true enough. The C'tan may have won the war in heaven, but the war in hell was still going on. Should I prepare my sons for this Excalibur's crusade, sire? Guilliman asked in a polite voice. Go and speak with Archdominius Cal. You will need stasis fields to get through the Frood nest warrens, thousands of them, at a minimum. But the departure will wait until your brother returns. The Emperor allowed with a mild voice. Can I also ask for 1,000,000 Thalax suits? Guilliman asked without any ulterior motive. The Emperor measured his stalwart son, considering the consequences. If he had publicly returned as the Emperor of mankind, it would simply take a writ of compliance and immense opposition. Even now, the Mechonicus only accepted Lancefire for his crazy donations of 1,000 STCs and other valuable things, while knowing he was a blank and thus quite unlikely to fall. A second Lorica gift would create a giant precedent, and bring about memories of another traitor Primarch who despoiled Mars. That will not happen again, Guilliman. Should you happen to find 1,000 STCs somewhere, maybe then, but probably not. Mars was burned by a Primarch once. He explained with a wry voice. 1,000,000 Thalax had the potential to match an Astartes legion of old, thus showing that Admech values Lancefire on the same level as a Primarch, and possibly more. They expect him to use the Thalax gift to butcher more Xenos and discover even more STCs, so it was also an investment. The Lion still had his Exindio relics reforged from captured men of iron, which will be useful for his next crusade. The Karave were still infiltrating and turning Imperial forces, even entire Astartes chapters. He still needed to decide what to do about the ancient UR025 man of iron captured at Precipice by Patroclus Lancefire, in near intact condition and even a dubious semblance of sanity. Perhaps repurpose it to help Guilliman obtain the third fortress. Not before draining it of all the priceless data inside its cogitator. Even better, link it with a blank copilot. He did have thousands of potential candidates, only needed to find one compatible with a silicate intelligence. The Ordo Sinister did have a spare Princeps held in stasis, now that Sabates was paired with Lancefire. Why did Lancefire named this new crusade the Halo Crusade? Was there something in the Halo stars worthy of capturing? Of course it was. Lancefire was quite goal-oriented. Another Halo device? Was he still planning to resurrect his dead mother? He would. He saw that in his mind. Such a strange man. Father, are you really planning to marry Lady Janice? The Lion asked on a weird tangent. You are getting bored on Terra, my brave Lion. You will go and exterminate the Karave's Xenos. Crusade-level requisition is approved. Exindio use is allowed, at your discretion. The Emperor decided with a faint smile. What he did in his private life wasn't their business. Watching the Lion depart to prepare his Dark Angel sons for a new crusade, Guilliman frowned for a second, then held his tongue. Maybe annoying father about his private life wasn't a good idea. After spending an entire month at Forge Mirror to repair and refit most of our basic vehicles with iron flare shields, and weapons able to damage the Necrons, we departed for Amraphel. In my wake, I left a shattered Necron fleet of 7 scythe harvesters and 200 escorts, plus a completely transformed and upgraded Forge world, comparable to a rich forge from the solar segmentum, not a backwater planet that dared to call itself a forge, because it had 13 Titans in its Titan Legion. Now they had a small Lorica legion of 50,000 Thalax suits piloted by war clones and a new Texasist clade to protect their machines from warp invasion. I did have to share the Demiurge clone Skane STC and build them a new workforce, plus defenses and manufacturing facilities, but it should be worth it anyways. Their shipyards will be able to produce machine-pattern corvettes and fighters by the thousands, while the vehicle facilities were already churning out Ragnarok tanks and armed sentinels, firstly for their own defense, then for export. However, what we found at Amraphel left me speechless for once. Not only did their parliament hire the Karave Xenos as their mercenary army, but they also dismissed their local PDF and most of their armed militias, considering them too expensive. Millions of votes as well, from the grateful soldiers that were now free of dangerous duty. The wonders of the electoral system would never cease to amaze me. Inquisitor Valain of Ordo Xenos was literally fuming and demanded we punish the traitors to the human species, while the Amraphel Republic felt safe and content under the shade of the bone trees raised into low orbit by their allies. To be fair, the Karave did somewhat respect their mercenary charter by blasting the prowling Necrons with bolts of warp lightning, but they also fed on the powerless population, leaving entire heart blocks empty of life and souls. Instead, I just smiled and produced Sister Decima onto the bridge, cancelling the warp spells of the Xenos and halting their mind control over the ruling class. Then just waited. It didn't take long for the Lords of Parliament to wake up and realize what they have done, followed by numerous suicides and calls for help, while the Karave wailed in their trees under the blanket suppression of a mighty Omega-level pariah. Now we can help. Better to be invited as liberators, than drown the population in their own blood. I'll send the Silent Sisters to deal with their root minds, after that we can deploy in force. I offered in a mild voice, while doing exactly that. The silent Leviathan walkers appeared in silence near the main nest of the Karave, while tarantula turrets and the blank tech marines fortified every intersection. As soon as the assault began in force, the Blank Division and the Astartes pushed on, massacring the devil-looking Xenos. Spartan took over the Thalax Lorica Legion, managing an excellent job as the commander of indoctrinated cyborgs, while M got the chance to prove himself with the fleet, hunting down fleeing Karave tree ships. Clonemaster Anzion had the more nasty task of recovering crippled blanks from the Auxilia, and working beside the apothecaries to install them into Thalax Lorica frames, as undying warp-immune cyborgs. Firstly it was only a few hundreds, but as the fight became fierce, more Thalax suits got blown up by the potent Karave sorcerers, as did more of our blank Auxilia. After 3 days, 20,000 Thalax had to be repaired and the pilots replaced by crippled blanks. The Karave had lost at least 8 million of their own, giving Spartan a respectable kill ratio, even when fighting in bewildering mazes of warp bone and tree branches climbing into the sky. On the planet itself, the Inquisitor and her Deathwatch Black Shield Regiment took over the Parliament and gathered the elected lords for questioning and interrogation, not that it took much for them to admit their guilt. Some of them were just greedy, pocketing the cost difference from maintaining a guard regiment with the cost of their Xeno mercenary. Others were populists, acting for public opinion and more votes to gather more personal power. And a small part were actual traitors and even secret chaos worshippers, hoping the sacrifices to the Karave would bring the rule of their dark gods into the real. They would all die for treason, but some would die in a more painful manner, as befitting the crime. Sadly, I had to reach deep into my petrified heart and find the mercy of sparing the planet from exterminatis, at the cost of imposing a blank governor and a much different leadership system. The bone trees would have to be trimmed to the minimum, and be used as orbital elevators and defense platforms, and an entire new army would have to be conscripted and trained. Not an easy task, for whoever was left behind as the governor of a far-flung planet. Then again, it would still be safer than being the captain of a spaceship, always thrown into the crucible of war. To my surprise, I even had a volunteer. Lady Racer Lancefire had been the captain of an escort corvette lost at Drusilla, and her bridge crew agreed to join as her government staff. The scale would be larger, but the basics were fundamentally the same. Feed the crew, prepare them for combat, execute the orders, defeat the enemy, or die trying. If it was a ship's crew or an entire planet, it worked much the same, in principle. I know I did so, quite easily. With a small knight house of 100 knights and a reserve of 5,000 armed sentinels, the new governor had a long task ahead. Then again, Amraphel would have orbital elevators for easy exports, and billions of people to produce things to export. They should do well enough, unless the Karave or the Necrons returned. While I did leave her 100 more spare knights in storage, the problem with knights was lack of pilots, for my house. Knight suits were being manufactured constantly by my STC constructor, beside other walking suits. The next journey took us to Gorstangrad, the homeworld of the Emperor's Swords chapter. I wanted to arrange a deal with the Emperor's Swords Astartes and provide them a blank company and some aid, but instead found the entire planet in revolt, and the chapter fighting among themselves, very often using the same swords they were named after, while the traitor Alpha Legion attacked them from all sides. After defeating the traitors and capturing their ships, we began post-battle analysis and found that the Alpha Legion placed subconscious triggers in the rituals used by the gangs and sects. It was from these gangs and sects that the Emperor's Swords recruited new space marines. During the cleanup of the Hive world and its underhives, a torchbearer ship arrived with Primaris tech and 1,000 grey Primaris, maybe on accident but probably not. The Emperor did have to spread his attention to 1,000,000 worlds, thus aid would rarely come on time. The Custodes shield captain of the torchbearers knew me from my adventures with the Golden Throne, so it wasn't a difficult talk. "Lord Lancefire, the Emperor's favourite jester," he exclaimed as we met. I smiled fondly and replaced his master-crafted polearm with a bouquet of red and gold flowers with large soft petals I bought for a hefty sum. Maybe about same cost with the polearm, due to flower rarity and expense of travel. The pole weapon even had a las cannon as a secondary function. A fair exchange then. Ever heard of pole dancing? I asked instead, while playing with my new toy. The man frowned for a second, then smiled back. If it increases your fertility, the Emperor would consider it a fair exchange. He quipped with a sarcastic voice. Good. Now, I'll be able to donate 400 blank recruits to the Emperor's Swords, including actual swords like this one. I explained patiently and held out a phase blade for inspection. The man became serious in an instant, and powered up the Catan sword for a few fast cuts. Catan tech. And even better than Calada's clade swords. "I hope you didn't steal it from a Deathwatch vault," he observed with a knowing tone. His suspicions were correct, but also not. I actually filled a Deathwatch vault with a fair number of phase blades. There are still thousands of them lying around in the Omega vault. And other nicer stuff. If only someone had full access to that vault, and was allowed to leave alive with the loot. You know there's a nanite plague inside the vault? I would guess old Federation tech, created specifically to dissolve intruders. The Custodes powered down the sword and placed it at his belt. "The Emperor thanks you for your service. And that means Corax," he answered in a dignified voice and handed me an Archaeotech device, then walked away, still holding the flowers. Fat chance the big guy wouldn't notice his own son running around in Astronomicon's range. As for the Emperor gift, it had a data port on the side and a single word printed on it with Auramite letters, Tempor Mortis. I hoped it was something like the moment_shackle that Adeptus Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris used in battle, or simply to safeguard the Emperor from assassins. It was nice to feel valued by the Emperor, although I suspected it was only a tougher job given for my results so far. Luckily, I did have a pet cryptech with a good knowledge of arcane technology.